In my last video, I stated that I felt sorry for Fatty Arbuckle, the person that's in the center of this one. I should really choose my words a little bit more carefully in the future, because it isn't as cut and dry as I made it seem. Mostly because there are a lot of conflicting reports, flat out lies, and contradictions on all sides of this story. Funny thing is, I knew that it was a complicated case beforehand, but I didn't think it was this complicated. Opinions on this case are really divided and varied, to the point that I feel my statement at the end of the Wonderland murders doesn't do it justice. So, my bad. No excuses, I admit my mistake and apologize for misleading statements. But this is a story of Hollywood's first real scandal. A comedic actor at the heart of the controversy. Newspapers sensationalizing a story to the point where it is really hard to know what the truth is and what is lies. I am taking a neutral stance on this. I'm going to cover the facts and the falsehoods. I will attempt to be as fair as I can with this. So here goes nothing. Roscoe Conkling Arbuckle was born on... Wait, this doesn't feel right, because this looks too modern. Hang on. Okay, that's better. Roscoe Conkling Arbuckle was born on March 24th, 1887 in Smith Center, Kansas. His father thought that he was the product of an affair because he was born at 13 pounds. And considering both parents were skinny, his father pretty much thought Roscoe wasn't his kid, which Roscoe was his kid. Just goes to show you, fat shaming has always been a thing. Also, his father named him after a politician he despised as further insult. Classy man, isn't he? It gets worse, trust me. When he was 2, his parents moved the family to Santa Ana, California. At 8 years old, Roscoe was performing for Frank Bacon's group of actors. But at 11 years old, his mother died, and his father, who happened to be the biggest bitch in history, decided to abandon Roscoe. This caused Roscoe to rely on himself, and he worked odd jobs at the hotel he was staying at. When he wasn't working odd jobs, he was performing and entering talent shows. One story of his performing was that he attempted to avoid the obvious hook thingy that appears off stage in Looney Tunes cartoons and tried somersaulting, which caused him to land in the orchestra pit, which caused laughter, and he ended up winning and starting an act in vaudeville. He was invited to perform in theaters up and down the West Coast. In 1908, he married Minta Durfee, who was an actress who would go on to work with Roscoe in a bunch of films. Speaking of film, he started working in films in 1909. He was self-conscious about his weight and would hate to be called the stage name that he chose for himself for some reason, which was Fatty Arbuckle. He would be bullied, called fatty a lot when he was in school, and his only real comeback was always just to say, I got a name, you know. But part of his appeal was pretty much what made guys like John Candy and Chris Farley popular. He was a rotund individual with slapstick chops. But the weight jokes were never his thing, just the slapstick. From here on, I am going to respect the fact that he did not like the name Fatty, and just call him Roscoe. Roscoe, despite his size, was a pretty agile and graceful man. He was fond of sight gags. He was one of the first, if not the first, to use a pie-in-the-face gag in 1913 for a film called A Noise from the Deep. He worked for Keystone Pictures for a while before moving on to Paramount Pictures in 1914. He also became fast friends with Charlie Chaplin and mentored Buster Keaton. He was pretty much famous around this time, becoming one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood. First, he made $1,000 a day plus some profit from the films. Back then, that was a lot of money. Then in 1918, he was offered a $3 million contract with Paramount plus his own studio to work in. $3 million is still a lot of money today, but if he were alive today and that is adjusted for inflation, he would be one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood. But with success, with all the positives, they come with negatives. In 1916, a carbuncle formed on his leg. A carbuncle is kinda gross, but it's a bacterial infection that causes clusters of boils to form. Either way, he had to work through it and would be accused of being addicted to morphine, which he was prescribed by a doctor. By 1921, he had been working on films non-stop for years, and an on-set accident left burns on his ass. Added onto that, in 1921, his marriage pretty much fell apart. He was separated. His life, while good, was getting a bit overwhelming, so he planned to get away from it all with friends. He decided to go to the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco. Labor Day, September 5th, 1921. Roscoe checked in the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco. With him were his friends Lowell Sherman and Fred Fishback. The rooms they were staying in, room 1219 and 1221, were connected by room 1220. This was to be the party room. Roscoe had received a crate of gin that day, and if you notice the date and are a fan of history, you would know that alcohol at this time was illegal. But let's face it, no police were going to give them much issue. The party became more and more filled with people. Two of the people who attended were Virginia Rappe and a person named Bambina Maud Delmont, who will be referred to by the name she preferred, which was Maud. What happened next is hard to understand because the witnesses are not even sure. What is known is that Maud left to go to Fred Fishback's room with Fred. Virginia, feeling sick, rushed to room 1221 and found it occupied. Maud told her to go to room 1219. Roscoe got up soon after and went into room 1219. Some say the door became locked and Virginia was screaming inside the room. Maud heard these screams and rushed to find out what was happening, knocking on the door and trying to get it opened, while others simply claimed the door was never shut, which meant that it wasn't locked. They also claimed that Roscoe wandered out, said that Virginia wasn't doing too well, and that someone should call a doctor. Now for a deeper dive on both witness testimonies. Maud claimed she burst into the room, finding Roscoe in his pajamas and Virginia on the bed half naked. Others claim Virginia was on the bed fully clothed. Maud yelled at Roscoe to leave, and he yelled at her a threat that he would throw her or Virginia out the window. I don't know which one he was going to throw out the window, so I'm just put both of them there. The statement really wasn't clear to my sometimes admittedly derpy brain. Roscoe's statement is that he walked into his room, she was there, hysterical, ripping off her clothes. He then tried to get doctors called, so a doctor came in to check on her. As he was explaining, Virginia stated, "He did this to me," which everyone except Maud saw as Virginia being drunk. A doctor did come but couldn't find anything wrong with Virginia. But Maud was yelling that Virginia's condition was caused by Roscoe raping her. She didn't just yell this because she wanted to. She claimed that Virginia told her what happened in the 10 minutes where the two were alone in the room. But Virginia's condition worsened to the point that another doctor stuck a probe into her urethra and immediately diagnosed her as having a ruptured bladder, to which the doctor claimed could be from violently throwing up, a hard fall, or something heavy pressed on her. She was moved after 48 hours to a sanitarium instead of a hospital for some reason. It was there she died. Now here are some more facts. When examined at the sanitarium and autopsied, there was no signs of rape. Second, a doctor did ask her if Roscoe raped her, and she said no, according to that doctor. So he's exonerated, right? Not exactly, because not only was Maud going around telling anyone who would listen that he raped Virginia, but when the trial did come up, his story changed. You see, before he went on trial, his story was the one I mentioned. He walked into the room, Virginia was ripping her clothes off, and was hysterical. The story evolved and turned into him walking into the room. She was lying on the bathroom floor holding her stomach. He got her to the bed, offered her a glass of water, and then went to call for a doctor. It was also during this testimony that aligns with what Maud said happened when she demanded he leave the room, telling her that he would throw one of them out the window. What also didn't help was that the autopsy found that Virginia's bladder had burst. On September 17th, 1921, Roscoe was arrested. So let's really quickly back up and talk about Virginia Rappe. Virginia Rappe was born July 7th, 1891 in Chicago. Her mother, Madison Rappe, died when Virginia was 11 years old. She ended up being raised by her grandparents. She began modeling at age 14. She also added an E at the end of her name because she felt it made it more fancy. And you know what? She's right. Rappe sounds more fancy than rap. She moved to San Francisco to model, got engaged, but the man she was engaged to died in a streetcar accident. She began to act, getting bit roles working alongside Rudolph Valentino and even Roscoe himself. In fact, they knew each other pretty well. By 1919, Virginia had become involved with a director named Harry Lerman. They ended up engaged and would still be engaged the night she entered that hotel room. Before I go into the trial, what he was tried for, and what was the subsequent verdict, let's go into some issues with this story besides witness testimony. If you think the media today is sensational and at times fake, well, meet William Randolph Hearst, the father of yellow journalism. He once bragged that Roscoe Arbuckle's scandal sold more papers since the paper's coverage of the Lusitania, which also was a lot of fluff and no real facts. Hearst cared little for facts, and his papers ran sensational headlines. He ran articles after articles after articles painting Roscoe as the villain. Here's an example of such falsehoods. Virginia's manager claimed that Roscoe used an ice cube inside of Virginia's naughty place to stimulate sex, which I left out of the last chapter because 1. It is unfounded, and 2, it led to the most sensationalist shit you'll ever see. Somehow a cube of ice evolved into a Coke bottle, then a champagne bottle. And according to William Randolph Hearst's papers, that is what could have killed her. This is fluff. But these accusations really hurt Roscoe's chances at a fair trial. Put it this way, Hearst's papers were causing groups of people to call for Roscoe to be sentenced to death even before the trial began. Anyone on a jury reading these things would be hard-pressed not to see him as innocent. And if he was found innocent, the press attacking him would have a long-lasting impact. There's a reason I believe that someone is innocent until proven guilty, because we need the facts of the case before we decide to condemn a man. But Roscoe Arbuckle would have a hard time proving the innocence he claimed. It would cost him a lot of his money, his home, and his career. A couple of interesting things before I begin this section. Roscoe's lawyers wanted to call witnesses that would paint Virginia in a bad light. Roscoe refused that. Maud was never called because she was deemed unreliable as a witness. This was due to the fact that she had a history of extortion, conning people, and pimping out women. District Attorney Matthew Brady brought charges of first-degree murder against Roscoe, but the evidence wasn't in favor of that, so it was lessened to manslaughter. If you're wondering why not rape charges, well, rape wasn't really charged back then. This is the 1920s. The most progressive thing that happened was women had the right to vote. We are totally more progressive now than we were back in the 1920s. On November 14th, his first trial began. The first witness, a woman named Betty Campbell, claimed that after the alleged rape, she saw Roscoe with a smile on his face. A local criminologist testified that Virginia's fingerprints on a door indicated that she was trying to leave the room, but was stopped by Roscoe. Bruising on Virginia was brought into question as well, as she did have bruises on her arms. But while one side claimed that they came from Roscoe, Roscoe's defense claimed that they could have come from the jewelry she wore or from somewhere else. The doctor who examined Virginia testified that her injuries were from a force on top of her. Sounds all cut and dry, right? Not really. In cross-examination, Betty Campbell alleged she was forced to testify the way she did by Matthew Brady. The doctor in cross-examination was forced to admit that Virginia never mentioned an assault when he was examining her. Also, a nurse was called who contradicted the statement by the doctor about a force being on Virginia that caused the rupture by admitting something as simple as cancer could have done the same damn thing. Roscoe testified in his defense, and again his story changed. He claimed Virginia came to the party room by noon. He invited her up and they drank. He claimed he got up because a friend wanted to ride to town and he wanted to change. When he entered the room, Virginia was vomiting. He helped her to the bed like he said before, but went out to ask the party guests to help him treat her. She then became manic and began ripping off her clothes. They put her in a bathtub with cold water. That is when they called the doctor in. He claimed everyone at the party thought she was just drunk. While it isn't much of a change in the story, it is still a change in the story. On December 4th, 1921, the jury came back 10-2, a hung jury. One of the jurors pretty much didn't listen to either side. Her name was Helen Hubbard, and she happened to be linked to Matthew Brady. She pretty much stated that it didn't matter the facts or the evidence, she was going to find him guilty. The second trial was also a hung jury. This time it was closer to convict Roscoe because he didn't testify. The third trial on March 13th, 1922 was where he was acquitted on all charges. The jury even wrote a letter of apology for what he had to go through, but an apology meant nothing because the damage to Roscoe's reputation, whether warranted or not, had already been done. So Roscoe was a free man. He could go back to work, right? Not exactly. Though he was found innocent, Hollywood still blacklisted him, which started before he was even acquitted. His films were pulled from theaters. This was due to a lot of reasons, but it boils down to Hollywood began policing itself. In 1922, the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America was founded. Its first chairman, Will H. Hayes, pretty much made sure that Roscoe was blacklisted. His whole thing is another can of worms that I don't feel like opening, but after a year, the ban was eventually lifted, but the damage pretty much had been done. Not only could he not work when he was banned, but he lost his home because he had to sell it to pay the legal fees. His wife divorced him in 1923. He did end up marrying again in 1924 to a woman named Doris Dean, but his career had stalled to the point that his name brought negative press no matter if he was innocent or not. So he began directing films under the name William Goodrich, which the films did poorly. He lost his smile and was dealing with a lot of blowback from the scandal that he could not get out from under. In 1928, he opened a cafe called Roscoe Arbuckle's Plantation Cafe, but in 1930 he sold his stake in it and it was renamed. In 1929, he divorced again. In 1932, he remarried a woman named Addie Oakley Dukes McPhail, and that is a fucking mouthful. Also in 1932, he signed a deal with Warner Brothers and began to attempt a comeback. He called the signing the happiest day of his life because he was contracted for 6 films with the company. The 4 that were released were successful, but on June 28, 1933, Roscoe died. He suffered a heart attack in his sleep. The last 2 films on his contract had been finished, but if they ever came out, not sure. He was cremated as he wished to be. Virginia Rappe died of a ruptured bladder. That much is certain. But what caused it? There are theories out there. Because of her medical records, we can see that she had a history of urinary tract infections. Some believe this mixed with alcohol caused the issue. Others say she had a botched abortion, while others claim that she was a drunk who probably fell or threw up too violently. The abortion theory is easily debunked. The autopsy proves she never had an abortion or given birth. Some posited the theory that because the FBI was adding poison to things used to make alcohol, that could have caused her death. While it is true that the FBI were doing that, I don't know if it was happening in 1921. I know it was happening in the late 20s though. Still some believe that Maud was right, that she was raped by Roscoe, and because of his heavy frame, it caused her death. Either way, we all weren't there. This happened over 100 years ago, so we'll never know what happened that night. I am not going to give my opinion on if I think Roscoe Arbuckle was guilty or not. I'm just going to say that lies do matter. When the media spreads one lie, it's a snowball effect. One lie becomes sensationalized. It grows, gets bigger and bigger until it engulfs the whole story. That is the legacy of William Randolph Hearst, a man who cared so little for facts and more on selling papers that he had things made up just to sell them. Hearst's willingness to publish lies did a lot of damage in this case, as well as to other people and entities. One day I really want to do a video on how Hearst's yellow journalism still affects how we view media today, as well as other stereotypes and myths purported in Hearst's newspapers that people still believe to this day. Here's an example of one from this very topic, that Hollywood is a den of sinners and devil worshippers. Roscoe Arbuckle was found not guilty in a court of law. Whether he was truly innocent or not, well, I guess that's up to personal opinion.